Hey everybody, it's Miss Wynn again. I just got inside from a nice little walk around my neighborhood with Mallory, and I'm sitting out in my reading room with my Madagascar hissing cockroaches. You probably remember them. So they're here at home with me. They're safe if anybody was worried. But now that I've had a nice little walk around the neighborhood, I'm ready to read you chapter 11. And this chapter is called Trouble on the Way. I made up my mind that the second week of school would be my last. It took us into September, and the sands of time were running low. Anyway, Tansy had her a payload of pupils and could just mark me and Charlie absent. Once she got examined for her teacher's certificate, it'd be smooth sailing for her. But the second week turned out to be anything but. It began with more poetry from the sweet singer, who struck this time in the Park County Courier. Dad read out the article to us at breakfast Monday morning. Auto accident stirs sweet singer to song. The sweet singer of Sycamore Township, evidently a faithful reader of these pages, was moved to poetry by last week's notice of the mishap between O.C. Culver spring wagon and the racing car piloted by Eugene Hammond of Terre Haute. The singer makes his or her sentiments crystal clear in the following mellifluous lines. Raging down the byways, way too fast to gauge, streaks the awful auto, the terror of the age. Burning up the rural road at a fever pitch, it leaves both horse and wagon helpless in the ditch. The railroad was a caution, like airships at their birth, but a car's a living nightmare for an unsuspecting earth. Faster than a baseball when you come to throw it, roars the awful auto to end life as we know it. Sincerely yours, the sweet singer of Sycamore Township. Well, it's not James Whitcomb Riley, Tansy remarked, or even close. Aunt Maud reserved her judgment. Dad pushed back from the table and said, well, I guess I'll go practice some diversified farming. He was in the market for feeder pigs. Me and Lloyd gave Tansy a head start to school. The boys' privy was rebuilt and newly shingled, mostly by Glenn, though Charlie wasn't a bit grateful. We still met up back there to start the day, arguing. Charlie said he didn't see how he could get away to the Dakotas until the corn was shucked. His dad preached and farmed. The corn won't all be shucked till October, I nagged. What's the matter with you, Charlie? You wait for every last thing to get done, you won't go anywhere in this life. Glenn Tarbuck stepped out of the grove. He was holding up a string of dead bullfrogs, greeny gray in the morning light. Their white legs hung far down. Glenn, you're going to get your full head blowed off if you keep cutting across Aunt Fanny Hamlin's property, Charlie said. She'd as soon shoot you as look at you. Sooner. Charlie didn't seem too grieved at the thought of Glenn being shot dead by Aunt Fanny. She's got her nice pond past the grove, Glenn said, caked with slime and full of frogs. They make for good eating. The legs does. We noticed that he didn't bring a packed dinner in a bucket. He brought whatever he killed and cooked it over a fire in the schoolyard, and enough Baldwin apples for all of us from somewhere. You gig her frogs? I inquired. Glenn shook his head and drew a slingshot out of his back pocket. It was the polished crotch of a limb, fitted with rubber bands and a leather pouch where the rock rested. It took a dead eye to kill frogs that way, and he had brained every one of them. There wasn't a mark on them, nor a drop of blood. I wouldn't eat one of them things if I was starved, Charlie maintained. They's kin to snakes. But Glenn hadn't offered him any. The cowbell clanged us inside. Glenn hung his frogs on a nail by the hats. The mailman had been and left 3 big parcels. We were agog. School never got mail. Tansy set us all to work opening the boxes. Then there was ohing and awing all around. The 2 biggest were poster-sized campaign portraits of the presidential contenders in this fall's election, Judge Alton B. Parker and President Theodore Roosevelt, framed. Tansy's eyes sparked. Underneath the candidates' names was printed, Compliments of the Overland Automobile Company. Sell your steed, it's speed you'll need. Terre Haute, Indianapolis. Beginning to read, Tansy fingered her throat in thought. The other package was a generous pile of large notepads and a supply of pencils, all printed with Overland Automobile Company, also complimentary. We had never had pads of blank paper and pencils. We had some little cracked slates, but not one apiece. Can we take 'em home? Wondered Flop-Ears, who had known very few gifts. In a faraway voice, Tansy said we could if we brought them back every day. She told us to hang the portraits over the rostrum, and Glenn had the nails. That day we pledged our allegiance directly to President Roosevelt. We were sorted out for reading now. Little Britches, Glenn, and Charlie were in the first reader. Flop-Ears was in the second reader by the skin of his teeth, along with Lloyd and Pearl. She'd missed the third reader by a hair and blamed Tansy. I was at the bottom of the third reader, and Lester Kriegbaum was at the top. He'd read every book in the bookshelf twice. even noble lives of Hoosier heroes. He needed all the powerful learning he could get to defend himself. He was so puny, you almost didn't know that he was there. We were to read ourselves or write in our new pads while Tansy heard a group down at the resuscitation bench. She began with Little Birches, Glenn, and Charlie, who were a real mixed bunch. Glenn was as tall as Charlie, and Little Birches was a gnome in between them. Everybody fell silent to hear her teach Glenn his ABCs. But Little Birch's nose was full. Tansy told her not to use her sleeve and to look in the teacher's desk drawer for a spare handkerchief. Little Birches bobbed up to the rostrum and over to the desk and pulled open the drawer. A puff adder reared up out of the drawer at her. She screamed and fell back in the chair. If y'all don't know what a puff adder is, that's a little snake. A puff adder is the ugliest of all snakes. Its head, filling, swayed. I froze. I knew it wasn't poisonous, but I froze anyway. Quicker than Charlie, Glenn was off the bench. He grabbed that snake by the neck and yanked it out of the desk. It was 3 foot long and real whippy. He ran it back through the room, all of us ducking out the front door. Tansy swept up Little Birches, who'd be crying herself sick in another minute, and held her tight. "It didn't strike, did it?" she asked us, and we all said no. We crowded around. Glancing up at me and Charlie, Tansy said, "Go get a garter snake, quick." "A what?" "You heard me, a garter snake, just a little one, cut out." Me and Charlie didn't need to be told twice to leave school, but a snake hunt wouldn't have been my first choice. Outside, we saw JW had already taken to his heels, no doubt at the sight of both Glenn and the puff adder. We ran for the ditch. Glenn came back up the road empty-handed. "I won't kill a harmless snake," he said. I knew it was harmless, and if you see a puff adder in the road, it'll roll over and play dead. You can pick it up on a stick and it'll still play dead. Of course, it's going to act different in a desk drawer. "Tansy wants a garter snake," I told Glenn. I worked this ditch, Charlie worked the other one. Glenn walked back in the field. It would have been easier in better weather. Cool slows a snake down. I personally didn't think we'd find any right away, but Charlie whooped and held one up, about 2 foot long, loud and unhappy. "That's no garter snake," Glenn called out. "I know it," Charlie yelled, "but it's the first one I come across." He flung it away. To tell the truth, I wasn't looking with a whole heart. I didn't like handling them things. Glenn slung a leg over the fence and strolled back my way. He patted his pocket, so we called Charlie off and moseyed back to school. Little Birch's breath was still coming in sobs. Everyone else was all over the room except for Pearl at her desk, not taking any part. Tansy tried to put Little Birches down, but she clung like a leech. Everybody settled in for a story. Tansy walked over to the picture of Theodore Roosevelt with Little Birches hitched up on her hip. "Who knows where the president lives?" "Indianapolis!" Floppier sang out. He was chock full of geography, most of it wrong, and always willing to share. "It's Washington, D.C., Tansy said, "in the White House." Little Birches had buried her face in Tansy's shirtwaist. "Does he have any kids?" Tansy asked. "Darned if we knew." "He does," Tansy said. 4 boys and 2 girls. This is the first family of America. What are their names?" "Search us." "Theodore, Junior," Tansy said, "Kermit, Ethel, Archibald, and Quentin. And Alice is the oldest. She is the president's daughter by his first marriage." Little Birches held on. We all listened. "The Roosevelts have turned the White House into a regular menagerie." That was one of our M-words. "Quentin brought his Shetland pony named Algonquin up in the elevator for a visit to Archie's room when Archie was in bed with diphtheria. Kermit has a pet kangaroo rat who likes sugar in a cube. And they've got a parrot and a blue macaw." Where Tansy came up with her information, we didn't know, but it was fairly interesting. "Guess what Alice's pet is?" "A kitty," Little Birches said against the shirtwaist. "No," Tansy said. "Alice's favorite pet is a little green garter snake that lives in her purse." "No," Little Birches said. "Not a doggone snake." "Yes," Tansy said. "I'm the teacher, believe it." She put her other hand out and snapped a finger at Glenn. He reached into his pocket. You could have heard a pin drop. We were all as silent as Sunday afternoon. Glenn handed over a skinny little, more or less green garter snake, 10 or so inches long. We watched it spill out of his hand onto Tansy's. It wrapped once around her wrist and coiled in her palm. Its eyes were like little diamond chips. "Say, listen, I think Alice's pet garter snake has come to pay us a visit," Tansy said. "Better not!" Little Birches spoke muffled against Tansy's bosom. "Why, here it is." Not even Pearl stood at her desk, staring transfixed. Little Birches had chanced a quick glance. "If that thing's somebody's pet," she said, "what's its name?" Eutanius or Talus, Tansy said without skipping a beat. All garter snakes have the same name. She must have picked up more learning at the high school than we had figured. The garter snake was content in the warm hollow of Tansy's hand. Little Britches chanced another glance. She touched just the tail hanging down from Tansy's wrist. Shall we keep her? Little Britches wondered. Well, Alice wants her home, Tansy said. We'll turn her loose so she can get going. Little Britches needed another hug, but then she slid down Tansy's skirts and bobbed back to the resuscitation bench. Tansy had swapped one snake for another in Little Britches' mind. It must have worked because she looked to be recovered. Now she was pulling Glenn and Charlie down to the bench to say, repeat after me. A is for the animals who keep us alive. B is for the busy bee buzzing round the hive. Russell Culver, Tansy commanded, see me outside. She always called me Russell Culver at school because like we weren't kin. Out on the front step, she whispered, get that thing off me quick and fling it in the ditch. She was flushed, but underneath that paler than death. I can't stand a snake. I unwound it and it slithered off. Tansy, does Alice Roosevelt really carry a pet snake around in her purse? I asked. Of course she does, Tansy snapped, as you'd know if you ever read anything. Sometimes you act like you haven't been born. She was still real jumpy about having that snake around her wrist. To calm her down, I said, you've done some pretty good thinking over there. I'll give you credit. Never mind about that, she said. Not one word of the snake business to Dad, do you hear me? I only have myself to blame. When I got to school this morning, the front door lock was broken. I should have seen trouble on the way. Sure enough, the front door was jimmied and splintered. What I wanted to know was who broke in with a sack full of puff at her? Whose hand shook out that sack into the desk drawer? How many hands? Remember, not a peep to Dad and certainly not to Aunt Maud, Tansy said, or else. I can handle this. I have to. I'm the teacher. And put a lid on Lloyd. He babbles like a brook. Now back inside. You and Lester are reciting next. And that was that. From out of the schoolroom warbled Little Britches' piping voice. C is for the cattle lowing in the sheds. D is for the daffodils nodding their heads. Then Charlie's baritone and Glenn's bass working the same territory. No power on earth would keep a lid on Lloyd. At supper that night he announced, Tansy's got a secret. She shot him a deeply dangerous look. Are we going to have to hear what it is? Dad inquired. She's got her an S-W-E-E-T-H-E-A-R-T, as we say in spelling school. Tansy eased off a little. And his initials are E-H for Eugene Hammond, Lloyd informed us. He's sending us up to school to get on our good side. It dawned on me that's where Tansy's new hat with the grapes came from. But me and Dad had the sense to keep quiet. But not Aunt Maud. Well, why wouldn't she have a whole bunch of swains and sweethearts lined up for her all the way back to the wind pump? Aunt Maud demanded. Good-looking girl like that. Tansy preened slightly, a sight in itself. Me and Lloyd blinked. That was a new one on us. Could it be that Tansy was a good-looking girl and we hadn't noticed because she was our sister? We gaped. And our teacher? We wondered. That night in bed, Lloyd said straight in my ear, Russell, you asleep? Yes, I said, but if I wasn't, I'd ask you a question. What? If you sass Tansy at the supper table, aren't you worried she'll take it out on you at school? Silence fell from the middle of the bed. It never crossed his mind. Then he said, Russell, I think she's turning out to be a not too bad teacher. Well, learn plenty, I told him, and tell me all about it when and if I get back. Then I slipped into sleep into the distant sound of steam engines threshing Dakota wheat. And that's the end of that chapter. There were a couple of good vocabulary words in this one, guys. I don't know if you heard the word agog. It's spelled A-G-O-G. That's a word you might want to look up in case you don't know what it means. And I feel like there was another one that I came across, but now I can't remember it. But yeah, try to look up the word agog, O-G-O-G, A-G-O-G, and see what that one means, okay? Again, I hope everybody's doing well. I miss you guys, and I'm glad that you're listening to these chapters so that we can finish this book together. We're more than halfway done, see? All right, I'll talk to you soon.